You know what I can't go for? Hall and Oates not getting along. After 50 years of just being like amazing business partners, taking over the planet with one hit after another, now is the time it all falls apart. And so we have Hall and Oates legal battle happening. And I'm going to actually go through the complaint because what was kind of interesting with this was how it was written. There's a restraining order bond of $50,000 that was filed, and I guess give me a little overview. What's happening?
Yeah, so Hall & Oates, the greatest selling musical duo of all time, and just one of the greatest bands of all time. They're going at it because Daryl Hall or John Oates right now is wanting to sell his half of the Whole Oates Enterprises, which is the company that owns Hall & Oates. It's like the merchandising,
Right.
it's the
The
trademark, the names,
trademarks,
the
copyrights.
social media, the websites. It's everything that's all inclusive. And he's wanting to sell his John Oates is wanting to sell his half of it to Primary Wave, which is a company that buys, musical rights for stuff. And I guess he has already somewhere in his contract, in his operating agreement with Daryl Hall, that they have to have permission in order to do any kind of
Yeah, so
thing
let's
like
stop let's stop right there. So, and this is pretty common, right? So if two people have a business together and they put together what's called an operating agreement, the operating agreement typically says, which is what theirs says, one side cannot just go and
that.
sell
Right.
their share because then it would force you to be partners with potentially someone that you don't know, and even worse, someone that you don't like or someone that doesn't do well as a business partner. And so that's where this whole thing kind of blew up. And so we're going to go through specifically what was filed, what was said. And so I don't know. What do you say? Why don't we just get into it?
Yeah.
So Daryl Hall, he and of course a trustee of the Daryl Hall revocable trust. For all those of you watching, this is a really smart thing to do while you're alive. Put all of your assets into a revocable trust, and then you can have it passed down to your heirs after that. Anyway, so he's the claimant, and he is suing a couple of people, right? But of course, this has to do with the attempt to transfer ownership. Now, what he
Yeah,
filed is a
he's suing.
declaration.
You'll see on there that it's not just John Oates that he's suing. He's also suing his wife and Richard Flynn, who are trustees of
Right.
the John Oates stuff.
This is a declaration of Daryl Hall in support of claimant's motion for temporary restraining order. So, just for clarification, he is saying, court, I'm asking you to stop, right? What will be this transaction that they're attempting to make to actually sell Oates' share of the partnership. Okay, so that's what the request is, but this is his declaration. So he should have written this, probably with the assistance of his legal counsel, but that's part of why I found this very compelling because it feels like he really did write this. All right, so he goes, I, Daryl Hall, declare as follows. I'm the sole trustee for my revocable trust, dated April 4th, 2008, which is a partner in the limited liability partnership Whole Oates Enterprises LLP. And it's co-owned by the respondent, who is John Oates. So, unless otherwise indicated, I have personal knowledge. And so, all the stuff that I say in this is my sworn testimony, essentially. I submit this declaration in support of the Hall Trust application to temporarily and preliminarily, enjoin the Oates Trust from engaging in any further action to transfer or from transferring the Oates Trust partnership into WOE. Again, that's the Whole Oates
Whole Oates
Enterprises.
Enterprises. Yeah.
Yeah, to a third party. Okay, so can't transfer any portion of the company to Primary Wave. All right. So the unauthorized transaction discussed below and in the accompanying papers submitted herewith are contrary to the express terms of the written operating agreement between
Yeah.
basically, us two. The agreement requires that the other partner has to give and get written approval and the consent before the transfer action can happen.
Which
Okay?
makes
So
sense.
which totally makes sense, especially, I mean, look, we talk about, I don't know what, $1 billion or close to that,
It's huge. It's
enterprise.
huge. It's huge. I mean,
Yeah,
they still tour on and off. I mean, they
yeah,
they kind of had their have had their little things, and Daryl Hall is just very clear. I mean, when you look up, it's Daryl Hall and John Oates. It's he's very clear about wanting to just kind of do his own thing, being recognized for his stuff, and and John Oates is recognized for his stuff. So I think that that's kind of also where John Oates was, where maybe you'll talk about later. John Oates was kind of coming from. He's like, he's made it kind of clear that he's kind of with his interests, and so this is my interest.
So then he goes on, addition, this application seeks to enjoin to stop the Oates Trust from triggering any obligation on the part of the Hall Trust to match or buy as a right of first refusal the Oates Trust
Right.
partnership interest, as that trigger is wrongly predicated on this unauthorized transaction. So this is pretty common, guys. You have a first right, and so you go, before you can sell, I get the opportunity to match
Right.
the offer. And so he goes, I should not be forced to now have to buy his share of the company to prevent this sale because I never consented to the sale in the first place.
But if
So
they can get around that, that's just kind of the chicken and the egg, isn't it?
what's that?
Just as far as he's like, I have to be given the opportunity to to match the offer, but now I'm being forced to match the offer. So it's like it wherever it comes from, he's still, you know what I mean? Like, it's, I don't know. I just wonder if John Oates ever even just went to him and just had like, "You want to buy this or what?" Because that wasn't ever clear either. But what was clear is they were
Yeah,
having
well, at least
conversations.
going off of this declaration, we'll see that doesn't seem to be the case. That's not what he says. But typically, before you start engaging in business discussions for a sale, before all that happens, that's when you have to get the written consent. Again, this is subject to their operating agreement and what they have in there. But there's a reason for it. If you and I are doing, a deal and you want to purchase my interest that I have in a current business,
Yeah.
we have to do tons of due diligence. I
Yeah.
have to like,
Sure. Yeah.
show you all my financials and contracts and all this stuff. And so that's why before we actually start that whole process, written consent would typically be required. So, as discussed below, John Oates and the co trustee of the Oates Trust, Amy Oates and Rick Flynn, have violated the letter and spirit of then we'll just say, whoa, the business agreement and partnership, having engaged in the unauthorized transaction completely behind my back and without my written approval. Most egregiously, they did this while we were in the middle of a
Yeah.
mediation, addressing our disputes in connection with woe, and in which the very specific question as to the disposition of the woe assets, including dissolution of woe, was being mediated. Okay, so he goes into further detail about this, but what he just said is, he did this where he's attempting to potentially do this deal. And he did this while we were in mediation and we were
Yeah.
trying to work together. Because, guys, mediation is not like, it's usually where both sides are typically like wanting to work it out and they're negotiating. So you get a mediator to help you, but it's not a formal legal proceeding like arbitration or a lawsuit. So he's basically like, we're working here in good faith to do this. And you're like doing this behind my back. So, interesting.
That sounds that I think that would that part would irk me as well. I mean, the whole thing would irk me. You know what I mean? Like, if either way, like, if you're with a business partner and they start doing that kind of stuff without even talking to you, of course, it's just weird because they do talk. And so,
Right.
so them going through this and having that mediation and stuff for that to go on, that does seem like real behind the back and just trying to cut your legs out from underneath you.
In a completely clandestine and bad faith move in blatant violation of the woe agreement, their operating agreement, John Oates and the Oates Trust purported to commit to selling its share of woe for some amount of money to Primary Wave. I'm so curious what that
Yeah,
amount
right.
is. They've redacted it, but for some amount that we don't get to know.
It's a
They
lot.
yeah, it's a freaking lot.
It's a lot.
Is what they put right there. They committed this outrageous breach to prejudice me without regard to my interests and concerns, without seeking to impose upon me a partner in woe against my will. Right. So saying you're forcing me potentially to partner up with someone or some company that I don't know, without
Understood.
regard for how closely and inextricably tied those interests are to the rights of the Hall Trust in woe. Compounding this bad faith, John Oates and co trustees breached the woe agreement by sharing confidential documents and information with Primary Wave, including the terms of the woe agreement, without my consent, and have even refused to provide my representatives with the documents and information
Yikes.
that they turned over.
Yikes.
And like I said, when
How do you
you're
do that? How do
so
you
there
how do you
was
get an attorney doing that? Like, for him, right? So, John Oates is going through these conversations with these people. So, he has attorneys that are working with him. So, like, attorneys know how contracts work. So, if you were a client and a client came to you and go, "No, I wanna breach this contract," like, how do you negotiate that? Because that attorney is gonna know, like, "Bro, I'm sure you have something in there that you can't do that. Like, what are you doing? How does that work?"
Well, I know exactly what they did because he talks about it here in a minute, but they had Primary Wave sign a non-disclosure agreement. And so, this happens sometimes when there's existing contracts in place and people want to have discussions, and so they go outside the realm of the contract. It technically is a breach, but they do it sneakily by executing a non-disclosure agreement. In this case, they got caught. While falsely contending over the last several decades that the Oates Trust wanted to maintain ownership in Woe, John Oates and the co-trustees engaged in the ultimate partnership betrayal.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just so strong. They engaged in the ultimate partnership betrayal. They surprisingly sought to sell half of the WoA assets without obtaining my written approval. Mutual approval over the power to sell partnership assets is inarguably the most important consent in any
Yeah.
partnership.
Yeah.
And John Oates and the co trustees' actions are wholly contradictory, considering that they have been highly focused on my actions and challenging whether I had properly sought their consent to even the most mundane act. Man, I can't even tell you, as a litigation attorney, this kind of thing comes up so much where someone throws such a big hissy fit over
Yeah.
something that they have done. And so, it just they use it as an opportunity to whatever. But he's just like, why would you do this when you like got all upset when apparently there was something that he did, that they got upset about. Anyway, so this recent bad faith conduct by John Oates and the Oates Trust has created tremendous upheaval, harm, and
Yeah.
difficulty in my life. Not to mention unnecessary expense and burden during a time when I'm in the middle of a tour throughout the US, West Coast, Japan, Manila, and need to focus on and perform at top level. I believe that John Oates timed the unauthorized transaction to create the most harm to me. Respectfully, he must be stopped from this latest wrongdoing, and his malicious conduct needs to be reined in once and for all.
I don't
Okay,
like
so
that.
this
I don't like that he said that to cause harm to him. I don't know if that means cause harm. Now, if you're saying he should have worded it as a tactic to distract me. Maybe. I could see that, but, like, to try to harm the guy, I don't know about that.
For more than 50 years, John Oates and I successfully recorded and performed music together as a duo, Daryl Hall and John Oates Ho. Throughout most of that time, we navigated the multitude of decisions and approvals required in any partnership relatively without issue, which is like really amazing. You can't like working with someone for any amount of time, let alone 50 years, is
Yeah.
really an amazing accomplishment. So he goes, we've worked together relatively without any issue. We've operated in a professional, business minded manner. We co owned several businesses entities over the years. This application focuses specifically on Woe. So Woe, again, this is their big enterprise here.
Whole
Woe
Oates Enterprises.
originated as a general partnership in 2019. John Oates and I agreed to convert it to a limited liability uh, partnership. Woe owns and or holds rights to certain valuable and personal assets created over time. So, they're kind of talking about like the social media, their royalties, trademarks,
Logo.
websites. So this is all the stuff, okay, that Hall and Oates essentially, owns. Over the course of the last several years, there's been a significant shift in John Oates' behavior away from operating in a professional and business-minded manner, particularly as it relates to Woe. His behavior has become adversarial and aggressive instead of professional and courteous. He began making numerous demands upon me, among other things, the social media. He wanted trademarks and assets. He created disagreements that were brought to my door. And I like how he goes, creating disagreements brought to my door by a revolving cast of lawyers. It appears to me that John Oates' intent has become to burden and harass me without regard to my interest as his business partner or the interests of Woe. So, to your point, you're just like, Are you is he sitting here and just being like, I'm gonna try to harm him as much
Well,
as I can. I
I
wanna,
will I will I will t I will say just from different interviews and just different things, Daryl Hall is the kind can be an intense guy in himself, and he's a very passionate guy in himself. Um, uh, Musical genius and a phenomenal singer. But just he can be. So, I think a lot of that, John Oates obviously had has his response. I'm sure you're going to share, but it's just one of those things where eh, I think that he's also selling it, and maybe he feels that way, but it could be something like, bro's just like, yeah, I'm just trying to do a different kind of business, bro. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so,
Mine too.
where Daryl's like, "You have spent so much time and money
Yeah,
on this." He's not gonna give an exact amount, but I can tell you, I
it's a lot.
mean, easily, he's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and when you have big cases that actually go to trial, you're in the millions of dollars, so, I
What did he say?
mean,
Revolving lawyers or what
the
was it?
revolving door of lawyers, or no, the revolving cast, that was it.
Revolving
But
castle.
he goes, "He's brought to my door
Yeah.
a revolving cast of lawyers," which is
So
just,
expensive. That means
yeah.
expensive.
Very expensive. It appears to me that John Oates' intent has become to burden and harass me without regard to my interests. So he said that. In late 2022, John Oates unilaterally began demanding that we dissolve our touring entity, which is Monster, Two Headed Monster Tours Incorporated, and our separate partnership related to our musical compositions and publishing, Hot Cha Music LLP. I was willing to entertain this as part of a global divorce and raise the dissolution of woe. So again, this goes back to him saying we were talking
Talking
about
about it. Yeah.
dissolving the company, and then you go behind my back and you
Right.
are doing a letter of intent for the
Forcing. Yeah.
potential sale of your share. Indeed. I picked this up from the first lawyer that I worked for. She always would start this as like a conclusory. Indeed. As more disputes began to arise with respect to Woe, my counsel noticed a mediation under the Woe Agreement in July 2023. And on August 17, 2023, the mediation commenced in all aspects. We were trying to basically
Yeah.
divorce Hall Oates, including the dissolution of Woe, which everything was on the table. In connection with Woe, throughout this process and time frame, John Oates was very combative and protective with respect to Woe, and consistently conveyed his deep desire to keep his ownership. So he goes like, this is 180 turn.
Yeah.
He was arguing to keep his ownership and that partnership intact and operative. There was never a hint that he would try to ambush me with this sale.
Well,
The mediation.
I think Daryl Hall's been very, clear about his stance on not wanting to sell his music, his publishing rights, or anything like that. So maybe all these years, John's been just kind of going like, "Oh, no, no, no." And he's like, "You better not ever." And he's like, John's like, "No, no, no, man.
Right.
I want to keep him. I want to keep him." But like maybe he really did.
The mediation process has cost me a significant amount in attorney's fees, right? Joel, to your point, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, and has also taken an exorbitant amount of my time and attention. The actions described herein were brought without regard for this effort and made it necessary to bring this proceeding at this time and on an expedited basis. So, guys, remember what we're asking here. He's asking for a preliminary injunction. He's asking the court to order that this potential sale has to stop. Okay, so that's why he's giving this declaration. So now the unauthorized transaction concealed by John Oates and the Oates Trust trustees. As noted above, I'm in the middle of a long-term multi-country tour, which I began in October 26th. John Oates and the co-trustees were well aware of my schedule. It's been
Yeah.
posted on my website for months and was discussed in the context of scheduling mediation sessions, and John Oates knows how extremely difficult it is to conduct business
Absolutely.
while touring, as one, is looking to perform in a live settings at peak and also handle a myriad of tour related business and creative issues on the road. So, again, to the whole, like, he thinks that this was planned because he was specifically on tour and less able to deal with it.
It's a
Nonetheless,
tactic.
Nonetheless, a mere 2 days before I was scheduled to leave on tour, I received notice that the Oates Trust had entered into a letter of intent to sell its share of Woe to a Primary Wave affiliate, Primary Wave IP Investments Management LLC. So there was a letter of intent. And guys, just so you know, the first thing that we typically do when we're talking about doing big, juicy business sales is that we'll put together letters of intent or term sheets. And so we say, this is kind of what we're thinking. Here are the basic terms. And then we have conditions. And we go, for example, like we need to make sure that this deal is wrapped up by 120 days or 5 months or whatever it is.
Setting the
And
expectation.
so it just puts everything into motion. So it's a big deal, right? If you're going to go and execute a letter of intent, it means you're trying to get this done. So he goes on, I was blindsided by this information. I have not given my required written approval for the Oates Trust to do so as is required under the operating agreement, nor would I. I have no
Yeah.
intention of becoming partners with Primary Wave, and the Oates Trust cannot be permitted to thrust a new partner upon me in this outrageous fashion. The scant amount of paperwork provided, John Oates and the co-trustees refused to provide me with the actual documents given to Primary Wave, demonstrates that John Oates and the co-trustees intentionally hid the unauthorized transaction from me for weeks, if not for months. And while we were in mediation,
Yeah.
the paperwork demonstrates negotiations between at least, starting on October 2, and then they did a non-disclosure agreement, which we talked about,
Yeah.
that was signed, and then I learned of this for the first time on the 20th. So, there's a little shade happening here because there's so many people involved, there's so many attorneys, and he's like, I never knew about this. And here's the thing. He had said as part of the due diligence, they had to turn over the operating agreement. When we're doing these sales, we read the operating agreement. So everyone knew that they
Everybody
had to
knew.
send.
Yeah, that's I mean, I think that's what's gonna end up, because like, in this case, right, so at the end of the day, I mean, don't they just have to look at that, and then it's just like, "Yeah, bro, this can't happen, it's in here." Like, they can't just do it because, "Oh, no, we already started good faith, with primary, or I started good faith with Primary Wave, so no, it's gotta happen." Well, you still breached. So, like, and that sucks, and then my question would be to you, like, what would that, so now that just means that whenever, Hall Notes wants to do a licensing deal, how Hall, or they want to do with the music or something, they want to sell to a car commercial or just something like that, that they have to now, that they now Daryl Hall and Primary Way have to argue about what they say yes to, or what.
Yeah, because more than likely, Hall Oates probably had designated third-party agents, right? So they have like a sync licensing partner who handles all the stuff for them. So it's not like they're doing this themselves, but they had an agreement as far as who they're using, how their operation works. So as soon as you bring in someone new, like Primary Wave, and they're like, no, we're doing it now. Like there's so many opportunities for just a headache at best, you know. So I understand his
You see
upset
this,
here.
Chris makes a good point. So he's adamant to keep his ownership because he was already trying to make a deal to sell. So yeah, so he was like telling him the whole time, like, yeah, no, I want my ownership, just making it clear that I got that ownership because he's planning that sale. I wonder how those initial conversations went. I wonder if it was just Primary Wave reached out to John Oates and was just like, let's just have a talk.
Probably,
And they're just like,
probably.
and his wife was like, just go have a talk with them. Just sit down with them. Just hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another. And it's like, yeah, I'll sign some, an intent.
That's right. John Oates also knew that I was incurring legal fees to continue with the mediation during the time period that he and the Oates Trust were in negotiations with Primary Wave, including in connection with my representatives drafting the WOE dissolution documents for the consideration. So remember, they were talking about actually just dissolving the company. And then he's like, John was the one that was fighting about not to do that.
Mm.
They hid the Primary Wave negotiations from me and ambushed me at a time intentionally to cause me the maximum amount of harm. Now, they have forced me to spend significant monies seeking relief to prevent the travesty
Yeah.
of them selling the partnership assets without my approval. There was no warning. This was clandestine conduct, and no information has been forthcoming from the Oates Trust since I received the notice of the unauthorized transaction. The potential of being forced into a partnership with Primary Wave without my consent is incredibly upsetting and antithetical to the intent and terms of the WOE agreement. Not to mention that there are assets developed personally in a 50+ year partnership, right? I see that. There's no amount of money that
Mhm.
could compensate me for being forced to partner with an entity that I did not agree to partner with, and whose business model does not comport with my views regarding the Woe assets. The harm is unimaginable. Now, I mean, could you argue,
I'm
like,
riding with
how
him
do
on
you
that.
what are you saying?
I'm riding with Daryl on that. Like, I feel him. I feel him. you know what I mean? Like, I think, it's shitty because, because of 50 years they have, plus years they've been working together. Um, John Oates doesn't necessarily have the same career that Daryl Hall has. Daryl Hall's out there all the time. He has his little shows and his channels and his things, and he's always touring. I mean, they tour together and stuff like that. I don't know, but maybe John Oates, after 50 years, maybe wants to have his own kind of plans with his own money and his rights and his assets that he wants to do. So I understand his, desire to maybe want to step outside. But I mean, I'm riding with Daryl Hall. I mean, it's in the contract on this guy. I,
Joel, to your question, is primary wave pitting them against each other for a better deal? No, I don't
I
think
don't think
so.
that's going to help.
And in fact, a buyer doesn't want there to be any kind of
No,
legal issues that they have to deal with. So this probably is
it's going to
hurting
hurting
the
it
deal.
because primary wave is as long as this goes on, if they can't figure this out, like they're probably going to be like, yo, like
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with
No, we're
Daryl
good.
Hall.
Okay, so Primary Wave is a company that brands itself as having a strong focus of exploiting not only copyrights but the
Yeah,
trademarks, the name and likeness rights of artists. Now, he says it as it's a
it's
bad
a
thing. Just
bad thing. I don't
they're
think
in
it's
the
a bad
business
thing.
of making money from the stuff
Money.
that they own. If
Great.
Primary Wave becomes my partner, they will have ownership and an equal amount of control over, our trademarks, social media, websites, assets, including my name and likeness, which is true.
Yep.
Primary Wave will likely have a goal to use the Woe assets and my name and likeness for branding and exploitation. These are all highly personal assets. That's why it is incredibly important that written approval be obtained on any transfer of those rights so as to not create turmoil in the partnership.
I
Control over
understand.
these assets, yeah, totally, is why John Oates and I agreed that our respective interests and corresponding control would not be transferred without the other's express written approval. If this transaction is allowed to proceed, it would hamstring my ability to sell the Hall Trust Partnership interest, which I thought
It was
was
interesting to
incredibly
throw it in there.
it was very, very compelling because he goes, if this is allowed, they would stop me and they would veto my
Right,
right
right.
to sell my stuff because now they're the partner that I have to get written consent from. So that to me, that was a pretty compelling
That's
reason.
no, I mean, they are such a partnership, and it's just tragic. I don't know that they'll never perform as a band again. We've seen tons of bands that have had worse arguments that still performed. They just might not ever see each other until they're kind of on stage, and and Daryl Hall's kind of looking over, and Oates is on the other side of the stage or something, maybe.
In closing, I'm deeply troubled by the deterioration of my relationship
Yeah,
and trust with John Oates, his and the Oates Trust actions entering into an agreement for the sale of their Woe partnership interest in breach of our partnership agreement without my written approval and while intentionally concealing it from me while we were actively engaged in mediation. He has caused me an
yeah.
enormous amount of distress. Without the relief requested being granted, John Oates and the Oates Trust will be forced into a sale of the Woe assets invoked. Terrible things are going to happen. So, what's the update? So,
Oh,
we
yeah.
do have an
So
update as far as what the court decided to do with the preliminary injunction.
Yeah, so the judge decided because this was, filed as of the filming of this date. This thing was filed a couple weeks ago. Again, as the filming today, their lawyers went into court to talk about, to see if they were going to extend the stop of everything, and the temporary injunction is going to continue until February 17th of next year, where they're going to be dealing with an arbitrator who has already been chosen to come up with a decision of how they're going to kind of look at this. So we have a cut like was it like about 2 months, some 2 3 months of some change before they figure it out, before they get it kind of locked in, and we'll see where it goes even from that point.
Yeah, so there's a lot of issues that they were trying to work on through mediation. Chris, this is the reason why, even if you trust the partner completely, that you need to have these mutual protections
Absolutely.
in place in writing, because years later,
That's the point.
things can happen,
That's my
people's
point.
minds get swayed.
Do you have John Oates? His response was real short. in comparison for sure. It's like, but just his tone of it, he's like, I would never. Like, wait, what? What's going on? What?
Let me see,
But
let
this
me
is
see.
also interesting that I'll also note while you're looking for that, that Primary Wave already has some interest or already has some of the rights from Hall Oates musics, because there is this sister songwriting team that are Sarah and Jana Allen, and they co-wrote Kiss on My List, or they have writing credits for Kiss on My List, Man Eater, Private Eyes, I Can't Go for That, You Make My Dreams, and they sold their catalog of 70 songs. In some of those included Hall Oates songs. So Primary Wave already owns a portion of some of the songwritings to some of the Hall Oates biggest songs already. So that might have been, they already got a little piece, and that was they got that in uh I don't have the date here, but I feel like it was like in 2006 that when they got those. I'm not 100% sure, but it was something like that. So they've had them for a while, so they have a
All
little
right,
taste.
and I do have the Declaration of John Oates. Let's read this together. So I, John Oates, hereby declare as follows. I am tremendously disappointed that Daryl decided to file this declaration from our private arbitration in this proceeding and make inflammatory, outlandish, and inaccurate statements about me. I don't know, coming in hard.
Hot. He's coming
I'm
in hot.
I'm disappointed that he decided to publicize issues that are subject to our private mediation and private arbitration from becoming, quote, adversarial and aggressive instead of professional and courteous, end quote. As Daryl has claimed, over the last 50 years, I've always devoted my energy to ensuring that both the public and the music industry perceived Hall & Oates music and brand in the most positive light.
Okay.
Unfortunately, during the course of our ongoing legal negotiations, there have been multiple instances where Daryl and I have not seen eye to eye. I nonetheless have tried my best to present opportunities to improve and protect the business and artistic integrity of our
Understood.
partnership. I mean, that's all nice. That's all
That's
nice.
fine.
Come on. Yeah, I
He's
mean,
not. He
you're not
hasn't.
really,
He hasn't.
you're
He
not,
hasn't said anything yet.
you haven't said anything yet, but okay. In fact, Daryl has become unwilling to work with me to try to protect the marks and other intellectual property
Yep.
that we spent decades building.
Perfect. As should be.
Interesting. Interesting. Daryl has become unwilling to work with me to try to protect the mark. So he's saying I'm the one that's whatever, and Daryl's being, we'll see. I am very aware of the importance and the reverence that our fans and the world have for the music that Daryl
Mhm.
and I made together.
Absolutely.
That is why I have been working hard to protect the value of our intellectual property to allow music lovers around the world to continue to enjoy the music of Hall & Oates. I mean, this feels like just like a
That
press
sounds like no, no. What I read when I saw that, what I saw from that was the fact that they just have very different ideas of how the business should be run. I think Daryl Hall is more of I don't want to just exploit and get our, whatever. I don't want to sell out, maybe a more old school mentality. I want to
Mhm.
just be really approving. I don't want it just going to a car commercial. I don't want it going to a grocery store. I don't want fries using it on their thing and they're dancing around to it. And and maybe John Oates' perspective is I want this getting to the new generation. I want this getting to in license and movies, and I want it to be everywhere. I want you don't understand. I'm trying to protect the legacy by keeping it going, not sheltering it from it. It's not necessarily a cash grab. Yes, we're going to be making money. Why shouldn't we make money? We built this. But that's honestly that's how I kind of am reading his perspective is they just have very different perspectives of how they think the business should be run and what should be done with it.
I have no idea who and what is motivating Daryl to keep these steps and make such salacious statements, but I'm deeply hurt. Over the
This
years,
part's key.
Daryl has consistently and publicly been adamant about being perceived as an individual rather than as part of a duo or group.
True.
Thus, he has insisted on our being known as Daryl Hall and John Oates rather than the more commonly known Hall and Oates. And that's, if you look on Spotify right now, that's what it is. It's Daryl Hall and John Oates. On this point, I agree. I now must act with truthfulness and make decisions that are right for myself, my family, and my artistic future.
Understood.
Putting aside my disappointment, I cannot address the specific issues that Daryl raises in his declaration without violating my obligation to keep private matters that he and I agreed to keep private. Committing myself to confidentiality prohibits me from being able to discuss publicly the truth that is the agreement that I made. I can only say that Daryl's accusation that I breached our agreement, went behind his back, acted in bad faith, and are and the like are not true. Okay, so I have a comment on this real quick. So he's like, I can't speak to it because it's going to be public. You can file under seal. Your attorneys can come together and get a protective order into place, and you go, because filings are public record,
Yeah.
we can file things under seal so that the public is not able to see it. So I don't know. He's like, I can't speak the
That's
truth
also
because
that's also
people
that's also
know.
what a lot of people that are in the wrong, that's usually a statement that a lot of people that are in the wrong use too. They, I got plenty of information I wish I could tell you, but unfortunately I can't. I can't prove my innocence right now. I'm not allowed. I can't say anything. Whatever. My lawyers told me don't say anything, but trust me, I got a lot. And when it comes out, you're gonna hear the truth. Like, and then you never hear it come out. So
Well,
I don't
and
know.
that might be why he lost on this, and in fact, there was an injunction put into place, and they will continue to be duking this out. But I don't know. I really felt not so much the second declaration, but I was really feeling Daryl's declaration and just hurt if
Yeah, for
if
sure.
what he is describing in fact happened. I mean, it's just so tough after such a long
That's
successful
There's no
relationship
way
to
he's not
have.
feeling like his heart is ripped out of his chest. Like,
Yeah,
but both of them, they both care a lot about this project, and I
I think
definitely
so.
think,
Yeah,
and I think that they just have, kind of different perspectives of it, just where, John's just in the wrong is, they have it in agreement. If it's in the contract, it's in the contract. Now, what John could be saying, I can't tell the truth about all the stuff, is maybe when they're in their discussions right now, he's like, he did say, he's like, dude, I'm probably gonna sell it. And he's like, no, you're not. And he's like, I think I might, bro. And maybe he did say something to him, but just Daryl just didn't want to hear it. And so, he's like, I've been kind of telling you for a while, bro, that I wasn't into this anymore. I didn't want to
yeah,
the responsibility, and I just kind of want to get my whatever, get my 500 million, my half of the fucking thing. And
for sure. Look, and business relationships and partnerships break down, and so one side might, again, yes, it is a breach of the operating agreement, but you go and you're just having conversations with people, and maybe you do a letter of intent, and you're like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to
right.
get it worked out with my business partner, and so it's not meant to
He's like,
be,
he's out of intent buying him
evil
time
and
to convince Daryl to just go along with it. He's like, yeah, you know what? I'm into it. Let me talk to my guy. Let me work it out with my guy.
yeah.
You know what
Yeah,
I
like we're
mean?
in mediation.
We're
I think
talking.
we're talking about dissolving, so he'll probably be fine with this as part of the dissolution. Because again, not to paint him unfairly, but just to the extent that there's hurt on one or both sides, it's understandable.
They're both adults. They're both, I mean, they're both well into their adults. They're in their lives. They want to kind of do their own things. Their feelings, their opinions of whatever, change or stay the same. But let's just not forget, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 80 million records worldwide, 20 studio albums together, 4 decades of touring together. I mean, like, just the amount of hits that they have and just songs that I listen to on a regular basis are, crazy. And I hope they figure this out. We'll find out in February, of course, but I really hope that they can work this out, because they're too good. They're too good to have so much bad.
All right, and we'll be following this along, guys. Leave your comments down below on what do you think and whose side are you on.